blood, and doom. Mix them together and what do you get? That's right, dude. Wait, no, BlooM! That's the name. A few of you may recall me covering this one in the past, back in its nascent demo form, but as of October 31st of this year, BlooM has officially released in its full, unfiltered glory. Developed by BlooM team, this features the worlds of both BlooM and Doom colliding in an unfortunate teleporter accident courtesy of Cabalco, and naturally features the protagonists of each. Now, since I last played BlooM, there have been a significant number of changes. The level roster, for one, has now bloomed to a full episode's complement of 8 levels, with an additional secret level to find should you feel so inclined. Something that I brought up last time, which I'm pleased as punch to see changed up, is the fact that Doom Guy can now take advantage of Caleb's Akimbo power-up where he couldn't before, meaning that yes, we now get dual Daka, and oh boy is that Daka with a capital D. Furthermore, the enemy roster here has received a fair bit of spit and polish, more variety, additional animation to help bring them to life. Pretty sure they're twerking, and I'm sure a smattering of other enhancements to boot. Weapon roster wise, you shouldn't really expect too many surprises when it comes to Caleb's loadout. Everything here is very much present and accounted for, but where things get intriguing is with regards to Doom Guy's loadout. As you've already witnessed with the chain gun footage, there's been a little bit of a tweakage here, but beyond that there is also a bunch of weapons thrown in on the plasma gun slot. Presumably in an effort to maybe make up for the variety that Caleb boasts on his side with different dynamite types and whatnot. In that regard, Doom Guy now boasts a Uac Frost Gun, which can indeed turn enemies into glorified ice sculptures on death, the Uac Flamethrower, which, aside from the really odd perspective on the raising animation, does pretty much exactly what it says on the tin, and for good measure, sitting alongside the BFG, we have the Uac's spin on the Tesla cannon. Each comes with its own specific type of ammunition, so mercifully doesn't eat into the pool of most of your other weapons. And all in all, it's nice to have a little bit of extra choice when it comes to freezing or burning or electrocuting your enemies to death. As previously mentioned, a full episode's complement of levels in this release, 2 of the new maps slotting neatly between levels I had previously experienced during the demo release of BlooM. This still managed to play absolute havoc with my sense of pre-established level progression, but the remaining 2 slot in where the demo version previously ended, fleshing out the remainder of the episode. I am still hugely impressed by how this fusion of elements from different games comes together in a fashion that, to quote my previous video, doesn't generate some kind of visual whiplash. The aesthetic remains the linchpin of BlooM's success in that regard, canny use of the Void theme giving BlooM team a fine excuse to blow these chunks of level apart, reconfiguring them into disorientating new forms, while also making great use of decorative textures to convince your eyes that these pieces still flow seamlessly into one another. The fact that these levels, for the most part, make any sort of sense is probably credit to the heavy lifting done with regard to level progression itself. These maps don't flow in the same kind of fashion that your traditional Doom map normally would, nor should you expect them to. Instead, you're dealing with a kind of structure that feels like it's seeking a kind of dream logic with its design. Sure, there are traditional elements present, such as switches and keys, but BlooM's switches more often than not turn out to be teleports, blinking you instantaneously into a new location, not noticing the transition in some cases till you fully back away from the wall itself. It's a fun trick, one that allows for all sorts of shenanigans when it comes to moving the player from point A to point B to point C. Some of my favorite usage of the gimmick, in fact, include the ringing telephone during wrong side of the hangar, where it surprises you with an ambush on the opposite sides, and of course, there's most of Uac Phantom 666. As a level, it comprehensively blows apart the concept of what you can get away with during the course of a train level, and it is just neat as all heck seeing these multiple surprising diversions shoehorned into what would normally be a pretty restrictive template. And let's not forget that view from the front either. Majestic. These, however, are levels that I'm already well acquainted with from my time with the demo version, so I would be remiss if I didn't spend some time poking away at the new maps instead and seeing what else they bring to the table. Containment Butchery in that regard takes up slot number 2 in the level roster, feeling like an exploded diagram view brought to life. Storage boxes hovering uncannily over the void, providing precarious footing throughout this starting section of level. It's neat, but occasionally you can find yourself slipping through tough-to-see gaps between boxes, and BlooM just lets you straight up die. It's a bit of a momentum killer, and honestly, it makes me wonder why it doesn't just teleport you out of the fall instead, like similarly void-themed maps, such as the ones found within the likes of Strange Eons. As for the rest of the level, it's a fine escalation from opening map entryway to grave. A clear demarcation here will see you crossing a divide into a much more definably blood-style territory, boasting multiple methods of ingress where you could kick down the front door, but instead you could also choose to swim through a gap in the fortress wall around the corner. Fun fact, BlooM doesn't always spawn the exact same enemies with each new load here, so while one attempt may see you facing down a phantasm after picking up this flame key, the next may see you facing down a goddamn Revermime. Revermimes are a thing now. Stuff gets a little confusing when this flame door key malfunctions and something somewhere explodes. An on-screen prompt tells you to use the manual system, but what it really means is go find this big ol' explosion hole back the way you came, which coincidentally leads you to the spooky zone. Don't worry, we'll talk about these weird NPCs later. But when you hit this switch, it'll spit you out of the spooky zone back into a big ol' meaty fight. Anyway, that previously malfunctioning door works now, which leads you through to a submerged switch, but the submerged switch teleports you to this further submerged section where you need to go spelunking for a key before it leads you neatly back through a previously locked door and back into the blood side of the map. Coincidentally, I now have a nosebleed. Dodging a few flame jets and moving through the eye door, a handful of encounters will stand in your way before getting to the final room, where the exit switch turns out not to be an exit switch and instead trolls you with an ambush. After that is the exit switch. But overall, not bad. Decent level. Shame about the pitfalls, but at the very least, it doesn't outstay its welcome. Not sure if I can say the same for follow-up Siege to the Pit, however. This one has a bit of an unfortunate uphill battle to fight with yours truly here, because the Pit is one of those Doom 2 levels that makes my eyes just reflexively roll into the back of my skull every time I have to play it. I kind of hate it even more by proxy when it turns out that in this version, the switches are no longer switches. They just sit there, doing nothing as I ineffectually wall hump them to death, just to be sure. Honestly, I would have appreciated maybe some visual signifier on these things to at least convey the idea that they're not going to be worth the effort. Mercifully, this incarnation of the Pit is fused with something much more interesting, and that would be its more blood-tinged counterpart areas. Does this make it any less confusing to navigate? Not especially. This one was probably peak disorientation for me, probably predicated on the fact that you can do a fair bit of derping around in this map before you actually arrive at something that can give you a stronger sense of direction. In this case, it's heading to a hedge maze, but it's not really a natural choice because it's preceded by a blue keycard light strip and a dead switch that just lights up that part of my brain that normally says, hey, you should probably find a blue keycard for this. But here, no, you have to override those particular mental impulses, ignore those decades of conditioning that have told you how a level is supposed to operate, because guess what? The door was never locked to begin with. This isn't the only hedge maze in the level, by the way. An earlier one is required in order to open up greater access to the level, and that's accessed via battling through this lobby, jumping out this window, and in all honesty, I never want to have to fight a phantasm in a hedge maze ever again. End of the second hedge maze has yet another switch that'll tell you to head back to the mansion entrance, which at this point sent my brain into somewhat of a semantic meltdown over what exactly constitutes a mansion anymore in this broken realm. But at the very least, the view through the gate here is intended to give you a pointer, which makes me wonder why they didn't just, make the switch open that too, and cut out a whole bunch of backtracking? Barging in here and acquiring the dagger key will lead you back to the central area where the requisite door exists, which eventually will lead you into an honestly really smooth teleport transition. I personally like this type a little more because it maintains a little bit more seamless forward momentum. It's not asking you to back up, it's asking you to carry on through. The area itself is really neat. Again, my experience with Blood is relatively slim, but it's a nice change of scenery, pace, chunky encounters in claustrophobic spaces, battling through apartments and then city streets before depositing you neatly back at the opening of the level. Hopefully you'll have done some thorough exploration during the course of this section, because if you don't, it is actually possible to miss out on the flame key, and if you do, you pretty much have to loop through that entire area again to get it. Final chunk of level leading up to and through the flame key door is full of heavies that can easily obliterate you if you're not careful, and the switch here will need you to swing by the pit again for the exit route. Oh yeah, and the other elevator platforms don't work here, which is much more annoying than it needs to be. You either loop that teleport route again or figure out how to jump from the lower platform, which doesn't have the greatest line of sight up to where you need to go. So yeah, overall, probably one of the patchier levels that I've experienced during the course of BlooM. Thankfully, this leads into Wrong Side of the Hangar, which feels like a much tighter map. Again, love the telephone gimmick, I love the Megasphere Troll teleport, the structural style of it in general that loops you through the map before landing you back at the starting point, which then transforms gloriously into a Nightmare Flesh tunnel that connects the whole thing to following level, Uac Phantom 666. In all honesty though, I feel bad for only paying lip service to either of these maps, but I have been over them before, and in reality I wouldn't really have that much extra to add other than they're both really fantastic pieces of work. If you're after a more exuberant, in-depth breakdown of them, I'd probably point you in the direction of my old BlooM video, which, if you're interested, has a link in the description below. I would say it might be a similar story with next level here, Ghost Downtown, but in this case I feel more compelled to recount it for the purposes of this video. It's the 6th map in the running order, holds the honor of doing a reverse pit in that it takes an original Doom 2 level that I generally dislike, sorry Sandy, it just sucks, and transforms it into something that's actually much more enjoyable. Opening section here will see you back and forthing through Innsmouth Station, blasting and blasting away, before eventually opening up into downtown proper, which visually is just a wondrous sight to behold. It's probably my favorite looking section in the entire mod, and it is just nice. Progression is much simpler than you might imagine here. Exploration revealing keys, keys providing obvious direction. I'd say that it probably stretches that concept a little thin with the I key, which has you buggering off to the back end of the area, but hey, at least you get to admire the Void Bridge a few times in the process. After a massacre involving a few arachna plants, roid rats, and cultist hybrids, a switch will open up the temple gets you the skull key gets you comprehensively bullied, and then the skull key leads to the hospital. The hospital itself features a fair quantity of cacos and phantasms and archcoils, oh my, and the hybrid archviles in particular are an interesting bunch. They'll usually have a flame pillar attack or resurrect, but never both. Oh, and when it comes to the resurrecting type, its death animation is just straight up hardcore. Rips its own head off, walks around for a bit, and then just falls over dead. Fucking brutal. After Ghost Downtown, we have ourselves a magical mystery elevator ride that shows us how the sausage is made. Not much else to say about this other than I think it's just a really fun way to explain where all of those aforementioned hybrids have been coming from. As the elevator takes us deeper into the void, however, we finally reach penultimate map, Dark Station. Battling through its concerningly spacious opening area, we reach the submerged ruins of a recognizable computer station. This level probably has the heaviest reliance of on-screen messaging that I've seen out of, I think, all of the levels here on BlooM, so you better be paying attention if you don't want to be getting yourself lost and gargling poop water here for an extended period of time. So, progress here revolves around raising the water level via specific switches. This opens up certain doors, gets you a skull key, and I'll be honest, I cannot for the life of me remember what door in here even uses that key. I'm not even sure I want to remember, because all I get are these flashes, flesh erupting into unspeakable horrors, rivers of blood, gouts of flame. Oh hey, the water level went up. Apparently that restores power. How exactly? Bug it if I know. Anyway, the powered up switch now opens up the doors to the local pub outside, and faster than you can say happy hour in Glasgow, we've got ourselves an absolute bastard of a fight. I thought I was clever using the pub doors as a bottleneck here, but as it happens, there's just enough decor in here to occasionally snag something like a napalm launcher projectile. Plus, the bigger kahunas soon make things very claustrophobic in here. Something that I noticed during the course of this encounter was these pink enemies that I couldn't quite divine the original bits and pieces of actually transition from walking upright to all fours after taking a bit of damage, even varying up, I think, the method with which they choose to attack you. And honestly, that's such a neat touch. I just can't conceive of some of the details that have made their way into the varied hybrid designs here. It's honestly mind-boggling stuff. Anyway, after getting myself killed over and over and over, the last kill triggers the final water level increase, which allows access via extended poop water spelunking to the back half of this map. Naturally, this section takes its cues from Dark Carnival, and Jesus Christ, what the ever-loving heck is that? I have to admit, Nightmare Cyberclown was not on my BlooM bingo card, but here we are nonetheless. Mercifully, it has much less health than the OG Cyberdemon, but then again, they do make up for it by having dual rocket launchers, and there is more than one of them to fight during the course of this section. Also, as a brief aside, I somehow managed to forget how turnstiles were supposed to work. I blame the influence of the Void, but in my ignorance, I somehow managed to override reality, phase through the turnstile anyway, but then discover that when I tried it again, the Void would not be fooled by my bullshit twice. Overall, this back half is mercifully a much less convoluted section than the beginning, which it exchanges instead for traps and ambushes, and oh hey, remember how falling into the void kills you? Yeah, that doesn't really apply to enemies much. Finally, we get to the end of this, and oh god, who gave JoJo a goddamn minigun? Okay, final level, BlooM. If you don't want this one spoiled, I would heavily suggest that you disembark here. Fair warning. I don't know what it is about this level starting in Tricks and Traps that fills me with a significant sense of dread, but here we are nonetheless. Maybe it's bolstered somewhat by the walls vomiting blood after you flip this switch. Nah, maybe it's just me. As befitting of a final level of this overall episode, the themic through line present here is that of boss encounters. First major section we'll come across here is one that is definably made up of elements of Tower of Babel, only gravity has been selectively applied to those big old marble cubes, and as we head inside, it transitions into a riff on Altar of Stone. But amusingly, instead of Ophelia trussed up at the top, we've got a Baron instead. Now, I'd wonder about whose love interest that's supposed to be here, but I already have a continuous nosebleed, and quite frankly, I don't want to risk a full-on brain hemorrhage. The boss hybrid here is a Cyber Chio, and surprisingly, turns out to be a bit of a pushover. Mainly because this level, I feel, is saving its premium cuts for later on down the line. Immediately after this, however, we have got another appointment with those spooky goddamn NPCs now drenched in blood, and for me, they're now just universal heralds of an imminent bollocking. Sure enough, the walls begin to warp and decay, and all you can do now is pretty much pray for your soul, because everything, and I mean everything, is going to come charging down that hallway, bottlenecking behind you, and pretty much forcing you to apply everything you have before they have a chance to pummel you into submission. In all honesty though, it just feels like a bit of a crapshoot. Somewhat miraculously, I eventually got through this, and I think what ultimately pissed me off most about it afterwards is that after assembling this massive pile of corpses at your feet and trekking back on through, there's a big ol' invulnerability power-up just hovering there at the back of the room, mocking you. And guess what? The mockery doesn't stop there either, because as you head back through the door into the hub and then outwards to another section, yep, this is fine. No problems here, no siree. The next amalgam of map elements at first is a little trixier for me to pass, at least on the blood side of things, but I sure as heck recognize a pair of Baron sarcophaguses when I see them. If anything though, this is just the starter course for this section. You can activate the Barons by throwing a sequence of switches. Killing the hybrids will then blow a few holes in the walls, and you might want to step back for, because this may come as a shock, but explosions can hurt you. But after that, a more definably Phobos anomaly section emerges above, but before you get to fully explore that, you'll first have to dispatch a swarm of annoying Kako hybrids. After that, You get to admire the view at the top as those walls drop down, and all you can kind of say to yourself is, ah, shit, this is going to be rough, isn't it? 4 big, fat, angry subucubuses. Subucubes? Whatever they're called. They have fireballs that hit with the force of a big rig truck going at full speed. They are on individual islands across this lake of lava that will absolutely fry you if you step on it without protection. And you've also got roaming Lost Soul hybrids that will basically do what Lost Souls tend to do, get in the way. Good grief, this was not an easy fight. Constantly moving between those islands of lava, keeping an eye out for those occasional angled fireballs that could catch you off guard if you're a little too comfortable in your circle strafing, and man, just buckets of health. Buckets and buckets of health between the 4 of these things. I couldn't quite tell whether I had an easier time fighting them as Doom Guy versus Caleb, but either way, I was very relieved to have it behind me. Plopped back in the hub, we get a cheeky arch-hybrid ambush, and then somewhat of a palate-cleansing sojourn through, at first, a hedge maze section, which is soon followed up by a mansion with some highly explosive walls. Not entirely sure who's responsible for the gas pipes in this place, but I'm going to hazard a guess and say that they're probably not fully accredited workers. Beyond the mansion, we find ourselves once more in a familiar chunk of doom, but here the water level begins to rise, and we are faced down with yet another boss encounter, this time against something that I'm not entirely sure I recognize. It's certainly some kind of gill beast, possibly on steroids, and its defining feature is that yes, it indeed shoots lasers out of its mouth. Even then, still much less of a bugger to deal with than the Subucubes. I honestly derped out a bit after defeating these things. I figured that I should have been able to get through the newly exposed doors underwater, but apparently the rising water level should have been a clue for me to backtrack through the mansion, through the hedge maze section, and then even further back, close to that central starting hub, where I should then hit a switch on the wall. But at that point, the backtracking is just long enough to sow seeds of doubt in my mind, so like the absolute melon I am, I ended up doubling back at the last possible second just to check in case I had missed anything. Getting back to flipping the switch, it opens up an elevator in the central door hub which will lower you ceremoniously into the final section of this map. Blood veterans will recognize the setup here. Me, being a dunce, however, did not, and also didn't figure out that the sequence of walls I needed to hump was very particular in order to get things going. Once you do, however, a few hybrids will stand in your way. This thing, a Kakochio with a wind gust attack, was kinda neat. I honestly wished I would have had that to fight earlier instead of the Cyber Hybrid. There's an extremely angry Pinkabus, and then it's onwards to a riff on the Mastermind Arena. On that front, first boss here, Mother Spidermind, is an absolute pushover if you do the dumb thing and just kill it with fire. Easy. The Cyberbog is easily strafed to death, but it's the next one that turned out to be my absolute favorite of the bunch. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you the Hand Slave Mind. It has a BFG glued to the back of its head, and it is perfect in every way. That said, from here things got a little shaky. So in my initial Caleb run, killing this results in a pair of Romerotrons spawning, which is fine. But bafflingly, the mod actually faded out, and despite being killed by one of these things in the process, I still got to progress onto the victory end screens. Naturally, this caused me to scratch my head somewhat. It must have been a bug, so what I did later on was return to that same fight as Doom Guy, and from what I can tell, my Caleb run may have accidentally telefragged the final boss known as the One That Binds, before it actually had a chance to comprehensively wreck my shit. And on that front, oh god, does the One That Binds not mess about. As a final boss, I'd probably say it lands more on the exasperating side of difficulty. As fitting as it is, being a massive bullet sponge, it also boasts projectiles that are absolutely devastating if they land anywhere near you, and then on top of that you've also got to deal with explosive magic mines that scatter across the entire arena, meaning that the usual strat of strafing it to death, that's right out the window. Now you've got to be very careful as you navigate between those things, trying to avoid damage, and also trying to hoover as much of that remaining ammo in the area as you possibly can, because seriously, this had me firing almost everything I had before I finally brought it down. Maybe I was just spoiled by that original run. Maybe I just had such fond memories of that glorious derpy hand slave mine being the final thing I fought first time round that this just couldn't live up to it. Either way, it's going to make you dig very, very deep for that win. And with that, our time with BlooM comes to an end. Our heroes tumbling through the void into yet another realm with one heck of a tease that makes me wonder if only a fraction of this puzzle has been solved. So, that was BlooM. An honestly impressive as heck achievement. You can just see how much work and talent has gone into bringing this really, really cool concept to life. Worth mentioning too is the fantastic soundtrack bubbling along in the background there, which, much like the hybrid levels and the hybrid enemies, also hybridizes elements of each game's soundtrack to create something all of its own. Something that, amazingly, doesn't end up sticking out like a sore thumb. I'd hesitate to say that this was an entirely smooth ride. It's not like I expected an idea like this to be pulled off flawlessly. Of course, there's going to be a few speed bumps. In that regard, some sections throughout BlooM can occasionally feel a little overly busy, mostly in reference to the overgrowth aesthetic and some collidable objects, which can be an absolute bugger to deal with when you're trying to wheel backwards and open up some space in a battle. Some aforementioned deaths from falling into the void still rub me the wrong way. Like I said, a bit of a momentum killer. Other mods have much more elegant solutions to counter that. Encounters themselves can go frequently from 0 to 100 with very little warning. I get that that's expected when it comes to the blood side of the experience, but I think something that does affect that here is the fact that the randomized enemy types that can change depending on your attempt can sometimes unexpectedly ramp up the encounter more than anticipated. For example, some enemies you just end up throwing shitloads of dynamite in your general direction where, after a reload, they're suddenly not there anymore. I mean, sure, it's nice for variety, but sometimes it can be a bit jarring. All in all, though, I largely regard these as relatively minor blemishes in the grand scheme of things, and honestly, I would still very much recommend BlooM as being very worthy of your time. I'd probably recommend you play it with a bit of a stronger recollection of either game. It'll certainly give you a deeper level of appreciation for what BlooM team has managed to pull off here. Oh, and maybe not play on Ultra Crispy first try, unless you enjoy taking an absolute bollocking from a game, but that's entirely up to you. By the way, have I mentioned that BlooM is fully compatible with vanilla Doom IWADs? Yep, you can spin this baby up with Ultimate Doom, Doom 2, Plutonia, Evolution, heck, whatever vanilla map set you care to spin up. It'll populate the spawns with its own brand of hybrids, and if I'm not mistaken, even subtly alter the texture palette to fit too. Would I say that it is a balanced experience in any way whatsoever? Heck no. But I will say that it does offer a few surprises, such as explosive NPCs, not to mention the one and only instance of me ever getting choked out by one of those damn hands. But hey, you know what I always say, don't let balance get in the way of a good time. And on that note, if you find yourself compelled to give BlooM a whirl for yourself, you'll find the link, as usual, in the description below. In any case, I hope you've enjoyed this video. Apologies for the gap between substantial releases on the channel here. I am currently in the phase of my life where I am utterly at the mercy of a small, irrational, angry bundle of toddler. You can imagine how that plays havoc with my ability to just get anything done, so thank you very much for sticking around and listening to me talk bollocks about mods. Feel free to let me know what you thought in the comments, suggestions for future videos, recipes for chicken soup, and until next time, this has been Mr. Icarus. Thank you very much for watching. Icarus out.